Hi, I'm Ed Highland, and this is the MD&M West News Desk. Thanks for joining us, and I'm joined now by Drishi Masand, who is an analyst with Lux Research. Thanks so much for coming by and talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk a little bit about a panel you were on about packaging. Paper or plastic was the subject, or both. Share some of the thoughts and feelings that came out of that conference.
Of course, I think that the industry is grappling with this issue of thinking that it needs to be one way or the other. And it was a relief to me that my co-panelists as well agreed that it kind of has to be a bit of both. We cannot just have all plastic packaging, and we cannot just have all paper packaging. Because plastics are bad, everyone knows that. But we cannot have all paper packaging because there literally are not enough trees in the world to create all paper packaging for the amount of packaging that we consume as a society. So it has to be a bit of both. What it's dependent on, and what the end of the panel conclusion came to, was it depends on the application, it depends on the market that, or the industry that you are in, and it depends on the region that you are in. Certain regions have better recycling infrastructure, which allows for more plastic use and allows for high performance plastic packaging, versus certain regions that don't have any recycling, so compostable, biodegradable packaging is much better. And then looking at the markets or the application, certain industries, that need the FDA approval, for example in North America, can't work with certain materials because of obvious reasons. They need to be safe and they have to have the appropriate performance. So we cannot just replace all plastic packaging with paper. I mean, in an ideal world, if paper performed the way plastic did, we could, but it doesn't. And so we have to have a bit of both.
One of the subjects or objects that has been talked about is a paper bottle. First of all, what does it look like I have not seen one, so does it look like a regular bottle? Does it work? Is it something that we should even be considering at this point for consumer use?
Well, first off, you haven't seen it because it's not commercial yet.
Well, there you go.
It's still a thought process. I think there's been certain pilot tests with like 2,000 bottles in Europe, in some small town in Europe. So that's probably why you haven't seen one. But essentially what it looks like is it has a outer paper shell, and it's got plastic on the inside. It's got a polyethylene lining specifically on the inner side. Because as you can imagine, paper bottles that are used to replace plastic bottles are for beverages or liquid products. Paper doesn't do well with liquids. I mean, you stick a big piece of paper in water, it's going to crumble instantaneously. That's essentially what companies are trying to do with these paper bottles. Paper does not mix well with liquids, so that's why the plastic liner is necessary for that bottle to even last for a few weeks, much less months or years, which is what plastic bottles last on the shelf. When they're sitting at your local Walmarts, your Pepsi bottle is sitting on the shelf for months maybe before you pick it up and purchase it and take it home and use it. So for paper to be able to do that, it needs the plastic element. That in itself makes the paper completely unsustainable and unrecyclable. So while all these companies switching to paper bottles are claiming that they're doing the sustainable thing, the better thing for the environment, they're really not. They're actually making things a lot worse. PET bottles, which is typically the material used today for most plastic bottles, actually has a really good recycling rate. Like North America is one of the worst in the world, and it has a 60% recycling rate. Why would we want to switch something that has a 60% recycling rate to something that has a 0% chance of being recycled? And that's the biggest issue. And it's because consumers and people think that paper is more sustainable without taking all these other factors into consideration.
So with bottles aside, so to speak, is paper really the better option than, say, plastic?
Again, it goes back to what application you're looking at and what factors you are considering. If you're looking at greenhouse gas emissions or water consumption, plastic will always be better than paper. But if you're looking at end-of-life options or how the material degrades in nature, paper will win that battle, assuming that it doesn't have a plastic stuck to it, essentially. So there's the issue of plastic versus paper seems quite simple, but it's so complex, and it's dependent on all the different factors and industry and application that a company is considering. And so the answer changes from application to application, which is why I say for bottles, it is horrible. But for example, for your Uber Eats or your Grubhub delivery, paper packaging can be a good solution for that because it is a single use, it's a short lifespan that it requires. So it might be a better solution than the plastic containers that we typically get our food in.
Interesting. Well, tell me a little bit about how large food and CPGs are eliminating non-sustainable materials.
So, full disclaimer, most of them aren't. I wish they were doing better. They all have these 2025, 2030 goals. And especially with the 2025 goals, I think a lot of them are realizing that that's only 4 years away, and they're not set to meet them at the moment. But one of the to be a bit more upbeat and optimistic, one of the few examples that I've been really impressed with recently is by Colgate. They launched the Keep toothbrush, which essentially is an aluminium bottom, and it has a replaceable plastic head. So you throw away the plastic head and you change it every 3 months or however frequently you change a toothbrush. But with the packaging element of it, they were able, because it's a Keep toothbrush and it's made with the product is made with the more durable material, they were able to eliminate the need for the plastic and the paper parts of the packaging and go towards a full paper packaging cardboard box, essentially, for their packaging. Which overall led to a concept of dematerialization in essentially reducing the amount of materials used in that packaging. So volumetrically, you're saving materials, so that's good, economically and sustainably. And B, you're using one material which allows it to then be recyclable, especially when it's not coated or it doesn't have a plastic associated with it. It can actually go through the recycling stream and be recycled in existing infrastructure and be useful and be sustainable.
We've been talking about paper and plastic primarily, but are there perhaps some innovative materials, things that are perhaps being used or are being thought about being used that might kind of spin the industry a little bit?
Yeah, so I think it's more of a business model shift that is leading to these materials. So they're not exactly new materials like aluminium or metals, but concepts like reusable packaging or refillable packaging. Like there's a company by TerraCycle called Loop, which is trying to commercialize refillable packaging with aluminium containers. They're very luxury oriented and not many people can afford them because they're more expensive than, say, your ice cream bottle that you buy at Walmart's at the moment. But by changing the business model away from single use towards more returnable, reusable packaging, we're able to use materials like aluminium that already have a very high recycling rate and have a good sustainability business model and a business storyline around them, essentially.
Now, you mentioned Loop. Are there other companies that are coming to mind as innovators, someone's who kind of making the inroads that we need to go, the direction we need to go?
Absolutely. There's another company based out of Sweden, I believe. I'm sorry if that's wrong, but they're called Packaroon. They're based out of Europe, and they're kind of doing the similar thing with plastics instead. So they're a shipping freight company that instead of the wooden containers that currently things are shipped in, they've created plastic containers, which, yes, during the manufacturing process are a little worse than the wooden containers, but they're reusable. So the company doesn't need to throw away that one freight when they're done using it. They can reuse it. So over time, it builds that sustainability claim and it makes it better. It has a better carbon footprint. It has an overall better sustainability footprint. So the concept of reuse is leading to a lot more sustainable solutions across all the different material options, except paper maybe, coming into existence. So I think that companies need to be more willing to change their business model rather than just trying to do the minimum and just change the material in hopes of being sustainable.
And the last question, just kind of off the wall, if you will, consumers are getting smarter too. And they're seeing that if a company says, oh, my product is 10% recyclable or 10% made of recycled products, they're going, that doesn't cut it. You can do better than that. And so there's going to be that pressure coming up on the companies as well.
Absolutely, and I love that question because it brings to mind an example of a Korean cosmetic brand that a few months ago launched a paper bottle for one of their liquid products. One of their very clever consumers decided to go buy this product, cut the paper packaging open to reveal that it was a plastic bottle inside the paper shell. This company then ended up being canceled on Twitter. The power of social media that consumers have.
And suddenly the bottom falls out.
The bottom falls out, and suddenly consumers in the US, which had never heard of this Korean brand, were talking about this Korean brand. And it's in a negative way. And so this brand has already lost all credibility that it has. If we just hypothetically put that to a global brand, that will be disastrous for a company today. So because consumers are becoming smarter, but also having access to better and more information, companies are being held more accountable for their actions and for their marketing, which is actually a good thing because it prevents greenwashing from existing, and it makes sure that brands and companies are actually doing better and not just saying that they're doing better.
Drishi Masand from Lux Research, and gee whiz, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is the News Desk. Thanks for joining us.